Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Guy Jones, and Guy is a Native American, and he is going to talk about the history of Native Americans, and we're going to start when Columbus discovered America. So I got to ask you a question.
Yeah.
When Columbus discovered America, that was before America got the name America, because it was America Vespucci that they named America after. So at that point, when Columbus came to this country or this continent, and you know saw it for the first time, what did the Native Americans call this land? Do you know?
And I mean, and that was one of the things that one of the most, I probably deal with this a lot more than just around, this particular time of the year. People always ask us that, should we call you Native American? Should we call you Indian? Oh, should we call you American Indian? And I tell them it really doesn't matter
Mhm.
because all of those are wrong. I said, those are incorrect. And I said, because and the reality is that we supersede America.
Right.
And so I said, so exactly what are you saying when you use such verbiage? What exactly are you saying? And that's where, I really stress the importance of dialogue and to talk to people, to talk to one another. And, of course, that leads to other conversations because a lot of people call me, I am Hunkpapa Lakota. Hunkpapa is my responsibility. Lakota is the language. And everybody says, well, how did you describe yourself? And I said, well, my name is Guy Jones. And I said, there's a lot of history there. And then I said, and how that name, because I was named after my grandfather. And my grandfather got the name because somebody couldn't pronounce his name, nor could they spell it. So the name Guy Winford Jones was given to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I carried that name. And a lot of people always say, well, you can always, change your name back because I do have a Lakota name, which is Wankuala. And and people say, well, why don't you just change your name? And I'm like, well, there's a lot of history there. And I said, and it's that family history is important, not only for myself, but it's important for my children and my grandchildren to share and to pass that knowledge on into how it is that these things came to be. And so, and it's I use them as talking points. And and it's that's one of the things that, you know, I I I kind of feed off of those. And and it's the other day I was talking with a gentleman, and he's a sociology professor. And I was telling him, I said, one of the things that in today's times we lack intelligence. And he's like, how so? And I said, because so many of us lack the intelligence. And I said, when you look at the various types of intelligence, I said, there are. I said, there's, of course, I said, there's the social intelligence. I said, there's an emotional intelligence. And I said, but there's also adversarial intelligence and spiritual intelligence. I said, these levels and these types of intelligence define us as who we are as an individual, as a person. And I said, nobody wants to have those hard conversations. I had made some I upset some people the other day when I used the term white men, white people. And that really upset them. And I said, talk to me, tell me. I said, because see, that was one of the things that when we look at certain terminology and the triggers, what they trigger to us emotionally, why are you so bothered about being white? I said, let's talk about it. And of course, they didn't want a dialogue. They didn't want to talk about it.
Mhm.
But, I said, how guilt leads us to a certain mental state of being. And so, it's like, that's where these concepts and where did these concepts come from? And I tell people that one of the most racist institutions are our education system. And I said it was within the education system. And I said, in a sense that, when you talk about Columbus Day, what, and the reality is what exactly are you saying? That, we're not human, we're not people. Our history, our lives, who we are,
Mhm.
aren't significant enough that you had to come along and discover us
Wow.
to, suddenly we now have existence. That's just like, a lot of the books that you read, you have historic and then you have prehistoric.
Right.
What is the defining line? It's Columbus. Because
Hmm.
before being discovered, we were prehistoric. And after we were discovered, we became historic.
Yeah, you were prehistoric to the Europeans, but
Right.
you were historic to your native people, correct?
Yeah. And I mean, and one of the things is that, like, even at that, and I share with other Native Americans that because you begin to see certain terminology that gets used and amplified even within certain circles. And they will talk about historic, use these words, historic, and I mean, ancient, and, and use words of the past. And I'm like, but they're not historic, nor are they words of the past. If you are speaking about them today, they're present.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not historic. And that's one reason why it's important to share certain knowledge because it keeps it present within our time. And when you keep that present, it's now. So it's not historic. And
You
these
know,
stories, are important because it's that knowledge that creates the wisdom.
you are a great storyteller, and I in the and I live in New York, and back in the day when I was in school, they didn't teach about the history of the Native Americans. So a lot of people who are not um in areas that uh where Native Americans live, they don't know too much about them. Um and you hear about so many other different cultures. There's books, there's TV shows, there's movies, but not a tremendous amount about Native Americans. Why do you think that's so?
And a lot of it has to do with guilt. And in a sense that when there's a tremendous amount of guilt, and that's one of the things that, like, when I begin to dialogue and talk with individuals, a lot of people realize that we predate Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a level of common sense. And they know that we supersede and that we were here before. But one of the things is that, and they have questions, they themselves have questions, because when you open that door up to allow those questions in, a lot of times they don't go to certain places because of guilt. They don't want to know what their grandfathers did. They don't want to know that history. They don't want that knowledge. And
Mm-hmm.
and that's like even, and that's even with Native people as well. You know, there's a certain level that, you know, they just don't want to get to. They don't want to go there. And because, the reality is that we're people. And all of us have that aspect of certain history, that experience.
Mm-hmm. So when Columbus came here and he landed, was he surprised that there were people of a different culture when he landed in North America?
Well, it depends on which book you're reading. And, because we have to rely on books to basically to get certain particular mindsets. One of the things is, when you look at it from an academic standpoint, the academics use a certain, level of knowledge and that, that they consider their history. But then there's also another level in which is that if you read the writings of Bartholomew Lacasa, who was a priest, because if you look at that particular time, all of that, all of that was they were looking for riches to finance the Jewish expulsion. And so, once again, we're still dealing with that today.
Mm-hmm.
And, that basic sentiment and relating to people of the Judah, who are Jewish people, you know, annihilating them and exterminating them.
It's funny because I just read something the other day that the article said that Christopher Columbus himself was Jewish,
Yeah.
but he he called himself a Catholic because he didn't want to be, I guess, killed or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, and that basic sentiment, you see that a lot here in this country. And that's one of the things that, like even when a lot of people, will tell me about their great great grandmother who was Cherokee, or they would, name a tribe. And in actuality, that is one of the things is that that's an atonement basically for their guilt because they know their history. Because, it's like, and then, and that whole, you know, how you say that whole social mindset and that mindset in a sense that, you know, so now we have something in common. So I really am empathetic.
Mm-hmm. So, uh, back when Columbus came here, um, were there Native Americans from the East Coast to the West Coast, from north to south? What was the uh where was the populations most?
Well, and I mean, one of the things is that once again, it comes back to who you're writing, who you're reading, because there's various different numbers. And when you talk about, when you look at the overall numbers, when you start including the numbers of North and Central South America, those numbers can go as high as 70 million.
Okay.
And when they talk about, like even here in the 48 continental states, some anthropologists and archaeologists have said those numbers can go as high as 50. in the
Okay.
48 continental states, but the numbers were high. Either way, whether you're looking at the low end, because there are some archaeologists and the people that will write, and in their writings, they will say the population was right around 4 or 5 million. But still, when you look at those numbers, they're always in the millions.
Okay. Okay. So, people here, they celebrate Columbus Day, they celebrate Thanksgiving,
Hmm.
and the way we look at it is entirely different than the way you look at it. So, growing up, were you taught that Columbus Day and Thanksgiving were not really the way the life was for for Indians at that point?
Yeah. And I mean, and that's where, like, even, like I said, it's important to have a certain level of knowledge. And when I myself growing up, and that whole, I would tell my parents, about Columbus, and they were like, well, that's what they say. And it's always about, and even at that, when I sit back and think about that, and one of the biggest problems in today's times is that divisiveness and certain terminology, like even the other, it's what they say. And and it's like, and that's where, but also too, I was always reminded that, that's their vision, not yours, that's theirs.
Right, right. So people really don't know what your vision is, and our vision, me being a white person, of European descent, um, it's it's really totally different. It's I can't even say that I'm knowledgeable about it. And
Um,
there was a lot of people like me, I believe, who are not knowledgeable about it. And you're a great storyteller, and I think you can enlighten a lot of people.
no, well, thank you. But you used the word there, different. And
Uh-huh.
it's not different. It's just you know, it's a perception.
Okay.
We experience the same thing. It's just our perception. You know,
How can we experience the same thing when your ancestors had different experiences than my ancestors who were Europeans did?
we're doing it right now by talking to each other.
Okay.
And I mean, and that's one of the things is that, and it's important. That's one of the things that, and I tell people this all the time, and that our stories need to be told.
Right.
It's about 2 years ago, I'd actually been invited to New York City to do a film, a documentary, because my grandfather is Pezi, which is Gaul. He was the one who led the frontal charge against General George Armstrong Custer at the Little Bighorn.
Oh, wow.
That's my grandfather. And they wanted to get stories, they wanted to get that on film. So they flew me into New York City and took me to a location. And here we are. I mean, filming. We must have filmed for about 4 hours. And finally, they stopped the filming. They said, Mr. Jones, running into a little bit of a problem. And I said, how's that? Well, we're not able to validate some of the things of what you were saying. And I said, well, of course you won't. And I said, you won't find it. And they was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, white people haven't validated my story yet.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. Wow. Wow. So, um, Columbus Day, how do you how do you see Columbus Day? What's your opinion?
And I mean, and it's like with me, what I was talking about early on about adversarial intelligence, it's important it's a very important talking point, and to have these conversations, and that's one of the things that, like, even I shared with you earlier on in private conversation, that how I spent time yesterday with, you know, community members from one of the synagogues here in town.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about, you know, the faith, the faith of because it wasn't just Judaism we talked about. What we talked about was the Abrahamic faith. Because you see, when you look at, Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam, that's one faith. And most people don't see that.
Right.
And and it's had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a minister, a Presbyterian minister from over in Indiana. And the conversation was on some of the basic political climate that exists, but also too that was happening not only nationally here, but also internationally. So we talked about certain levels of intelligence, types of the various types, and I made a comment and I told them about the 6 types of Christianity, and I said the average person can't even name 4, and he was like, "The heck are you talking about? 6 types of Christianity?" And I said, "There's 6 types." And he was like, "Well, you got Lutherans and I said, "No, those are denominations." I said, "I'm talking about types." I said, "There's 6 types of Christianity." And he couldn't give me but 2. And he's like, "Where do you learn this stuff?" And I said, "Well, most people," I said, "are not aware of the indoctrination that takes place." So I said, when we think about the mental mindset with which where we are coming from, I said, you have to look back at your education, whether it's within the school systems or within the churches. And I said, it was within the churches that, that this was exposed to me. And I said, and I'm really intrigued now by this level of, because you have mysticism. And that's where, when you look at, like, there's this big movement regarding to and relating to Native American spirituality. It's that quest of understanding mysticism. They just don't. They go there, but
Mm-hmm.
they are not familiar with the terminology,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a level of, there's a need. People want to be people by all rights. A lot of people want to be, they want to do the right thing, and they need to, without making themselves look bad. So they want to do the right thing, and so they make certain, quests or journeys, and to find these things. And that's one reason why, when you look at how Sedona, Arizona, everybody spends thousands of dollars to go to Sedona. And they don't realize that what they're experiencing in Sedona, they can experience in their backyard if they would just change their mind,
Mm-hmm.
get their mind right.
Mm. Well, Guy, we've talked for a half hour,
Oh, wow.
and um I would like, next time we talk, I would like to talk to you about the spirituality of Native Americans. And I think that's important because when Columbus came here, they didn't know what Christianity was. They had their own separate spiritual, stuff. And
Mhm.
I think that's important that we should talk about that.
That's good. All right.
Okay, great.
Didn't realize a half hour had gone by so quick.
Right. So I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. My guest today has been Guy Jones. And Guy, you live in what state?
I live in Dayton, Ohio.
Okay. So we'll talk again when at your convenience. So
Okay.
thank you everybody for listening. Thanks, Guy. Have a great day.
Take care.
And for everybody that's listening and likes this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel.